Happy Whiskey Wednesday, everybody. This is yet another episode of Women in Whiskey. I am a host, Rashawn Hall, aka Bar Time Stories, and we have another great interview for you guys this week. We took a little break last week, but we are back. And this week, I have to be on my P's and Q's because I am interviewing an interviewer, getting into a documentarian, someone who is getting into the world of whiskey, and particularly the women who make this great whiskey. So very similar to what we've been doing here. So I'm going to welcome in Leigha Kingsley from The Spirit of Women. She is the executive producer and co-creator. Is that correct?
Co-director, but the creator of it, yes.
There we go. Co-director and creator. So Leigha, thank you so much for being here. Tell everyone first and foremost what the inspiration behind The Spirit of Women, the documentary, was.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am so honored to be here with you and talking about this today because it's really, really important. So the inspiration behind The Spirit of Women actually started a couple years ago. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, and as you all know, 95% of the world's bourbon is made in Kentucky. So I was surrounded by bourbon, whiskey, everything that goes into making that, but it was never something that I felt like was a drink that was reserved for women. It always seemed like it was reserved for men. Like everything that I was around, my environment, media, television, everything always told me that that was something that men enjoyed and not women. So fast forward to a couple years ago, I was actually at a distillery with a friend of mine, and I started to actually learn about the art and craft of whiskey and bourbon making, something that I wasn't familiar with. And because I'm a creative, I became really, really fascinated by the art that goes into this American spirit. From, the limestone water in Kentucky that you can't get everywhere in the country, that filters out the bourbon and whiskey as it's being distilled, to the trees, the, American white oak barrels that they are aged in. This whole process became really, really interesting to me. But everything that I was seeing still told me that this was a spirit that was reserved for men. So I went down this whole rabbit hole where I started researching, how bourbon came to be in America. Like, what were the laws behind that? How did whiskey come to America? And I started to find out about all of these incredible women who had these very, very vital roles in not only the creation of alcohol since the beginning of time, but also being the actual backbone behind this American spirit for generations and generations, all the way back to when we, first came to America and started making whiskey, which also comes from Scotland, the women in Scotland and Ireland. And I was like, what? How do I not know about this? How do I not know about these women? And I grew up in a state where 95% of the world's bourbon is made. This, as a filmmaker, as a woman, as, somebody who tries to very much empower women in the world, how did I not know about this? This is not okay with me. So I decided that I wanted to do something about it, and I didn't know what that was going to be yet. And about a year and a half ago, I was standing in Whole Foods and I saw an American whiskey magazine, and the entire female executive team of Uncle Nearest was on the cover of it. I had never seen anything like that before. I was like, who are these amazing women on the cover of American Whiskey magazine? So I bought the magazine, and that's where I learned about them. And I also learned about Marianne Eaves and her being the very first female master distiller in the state of Kentucky since Prohibition. So I was like, okay, well, that's my sign. That is my sign. This story needs to be told. We have to give women in the bourbon and whiskey industry the platform that they deserve, that is very much overdue. And so I wanted to do a documentary about these incredible women who are paving the way for females in this very male-dominated world of whiskey and bourbon, so that I can try, and these women are definitely trying to shift the narrative around this beautiful, incredible American spirit that so many of us enjoy. I mean, almost 40% of consumers of whiskey and bourbon are women. But interestingly, there's 2,000 whiskey and bourbon distilleries operating in the United States, and less than 1% are owned by women, and even less than that, women of color. And that is just not okay with me. So that that's why I wanted to make this, and that's why we're doing it.
It's amazing. And it's so interesting, obviously, as a person of color and as a man, but obviously a person of color. That's why we started this series. To be completely frank, a brand reached out to us and was doing something for Women's History Month, and was like, "That's amazing. Yes, we want to tell those stories, but also it goes, just like Black History Month, like any other Heritage Month, it goes beyond that." So, I think love hearing that story. What is as you started this endeavor with your co-creator, or your co-director, what is the thing that was either, I guess, both most heartening and also most disheartening as you began this process of wanting to tell the story?
That's a great question. So I would say in the very beginning, I was really doing all of this myself. My co-director is incredible. Her name is Sarah Moshman. She's an Emmy Award-winning female documentary director. But at the very beginning stages of this, I was really doing everything myself. I didn't know her yet. I hadn't been introduced to her, and I didn't know how I was going to do this. I didn't have the financing to make this documentary. I didn't have the studios in Los Angeles, shouting out and wanting to do this. So it was really pioneering this and putting pieces together in how was I going to make this happen? And one of the most heartening things that started to develop were the relationships that I started building with the women in the whiskey and bourbon industry. And how, as I built those relationships and I told them what it was that I wanted to do, not only to provide this platform for them, but for all people in the world, because anyone who sees this will hopefully be affected by it in a positive way. They then started to introduce me to other women that they wanted to cheer on. So I went from seeing this, magazine, this American Whiskey magazine, and being introduced to the team at Uncle Nearest and Marianne Eves, who I reached out to personally, to then building this whole kind of participant casts that we have and brands that are attached and women that are attached, which came through word of mouth. As I would talk to Marianne, she was like, well, you got to talk to this person and you got to talk to this person. These women are doing incredible things. And so I started to really see this beautiful community within the whiskey industry, and it blossomed from there. And I have to also give a shout out to the men in the whiskey and bourbon industry, because this film isn't about putting men down or trying to isolate them. It is about all of us coming together to see that there's an issue and how do we solve that problem as a unified group. And I saw that men were coming out to support as well, whether that was, somebody from a brand or a stranger that followed us on Instagram that was like, I have a daughter. I'm so happy you're doing this. This matters. This film matters. And this is going to teach my daughter that she can do anything she wants in the industry of whiskey and bourbon, or any industry that is male dominated. So that's one of the things that really keeps me going when things get tough with this. And I found a lot of part in that. I would say the disheartening part is the process in which you have to go through in order to make a story that really, really matters, that not everyone in a position of power sees. And so you hit these roadblocks, not from the community within the whiskey and bourbon industry, but within the world of filmmaking and financiers and investors and that whole world that I've been in for over 10 years in Los Angeles as an actress, producer, writer, and now director. And I believe with all of my heart that this is a film that matters and is going to help shift and transform the way that we think about women in the world. So it's not just about whiskey and bourbon, it's about how we view women. And to see the positions of power that are oftentimes dominated by men in the industry I'm in to not see the value or the want to push this forward, that can be very, very disheartening. I've been developing this for almost 2 years now. And I hit walls and I keep going, and hit walls and I keep going. And so I would say that that is the tough part.
I think that's a beautiful microcosm just in terms of what, you know, both women and people of color just indoor in general. It's like, oh, I want to create this thing. It seems so easy, or other people do that thing so easily, and this is such an amazing story. And to your point, like, yeah, when we started doing this last season, like, there are so many amazing stories of people of all walks of life who are creating this juice. And we have had the experience, the pleasure and the honor and the experience of, whether it's in Louisville or Texas or Tennessee or wherever, to go to all these amazing places and find these very unique stories, and they deserve to be told. And you feel like they're getting told. And it seems, again, with all of the streaming options that are out there, you feel like it's so easy to just get your story out there, but it doesn't seem to necessarily be that. So what
100%.
inspires you? Yeah, what inspires you to keep going when you're facing those hurdles and trying to deal with that, trying to get this story out there?
Oh man. So you are pushing on a heartstring for me right now. I think because I've been in this industry in Los Angeles in the film world for so many years. And my trajectory, starting out as an actress and then moving into the world of writing, moving into the world of producing, and now directing, has a through line that's always been the same. And the through line is, I want to create meaningful art through my ability of storytelling. Well, whether that is as an actress, a writer, a producer, or a director. I want to be able to use my abilities to make a difference. And I don't say that as a cliche thing that I think a lot of people say. I mean that with a full heart, that I want to be of service to the world, and I want to be of service to specifically people who don't have a voice all the time, or their voices have been isolated or oppressed, or they haven't been given the spotlight that they deserve. And so for me, I've kept going with this particular story because I believe in change, and I believe in these women, and I believe in the sacrifices that they have made, and I believe in the sacrifices that the women who came before us made, like Margie Samuels from Maker's Mark. She's no longer with us. But she did things in the 1950s that no woman was doing. And she was in a world that told her she couldn't do those things, and she did them anyway. And if she hadn't done them, we wouldn't maybe be here or be as progressive in this industry as we are. And there are so many stories like that. And Von Weaver being a woman of color, I mean, that woman is a force. I love her so much. She's such an inspiration to me. And so I think as human beings, not to get too in depth, but I think that as human beings, we are given the opportunity to make an impact in the world. And we can either choose to do that and use it for good, or we can choose to kind of ignore it or stay asleep, whatever word you want to use, and continue to act in ways that feed our own self-interest. And that is not what I feel I'm here to do. And so on the really hard days and on the days that I feel like I'm hitting every freaking wall and every obstacle, I know that this is bigger than me and that it fucking matters. These stories matter. These women matter. The people who have lived in the shadows for so long, their stories matter. And that is what keeps me going is I just, with all of my being and my heart, I believe in this project and I believe in these people. And so I won't quit until it's out there in the world.
I love that you mentioned Marjorie Samuels, because that was a story that I didn't even know as an avid bourbon drinker. I didn't even know until I did the Maker's tour. And it was doing the tour, and it was like, no, Marjorie, it was his wife who did this and did this. I was like, and the hand cut labels, like, so basically she led the way, which is not unusual in most common marriages now. But it's like, yeah, it's like you didn't get that credit back then. So I love that. I think, talking about Marjorie Samuels in Kentucky and in Maker's Mark, how important it's also funny to me I'm a Northeasterner, I'm a Jersey guy. The first time I went to Kentucky, I had perceptions. I think I wonder if part of this is also breaking down misconceptions about what Kentucky is and what that state means and what the bourbon, and again, what the stereotype of what the bourbon industry is, and even breaking that down, because in my experiences in Lexington and Louisville, being down there before, it's completely different than the northern East Coast, whatever coastal elite experience you assume you're going to have when you get to Kentucky. How much of your own roots played a role in wanting to tell the story?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm so glad to hear that you were able to make it down to Lexington and Louisville and do like a whole tour of Kentucky. Um, it's interesting. I think that there are definitely misconceptions about Kentucky, about all states, stereotypes that we hear. And my dad was in the Army. He flew Apaches and he was a major. And so I've lived all over the world. But when he retired in Lexington, Kentucky. And so that's where I grew up from, I think about third grade on. So that's what I call home. And it's interesting because at the time growing up there, I didn't realize what an impact living there and growing up there was going to have on me, both good and bad. Right. So Lexington is a relatively small city. Compared, I guess, to where I live now, Los Angeles. And there were certain things about growing up there that at the time I didn't appreciate. I just assumed that everyone kind of was growing up like I was in that area that I was. And it wasn't until I became an adult and I started traveling and I moved to Los Angeles when I was 19, that I started to kind of see the things I had taken for granted there. It definitely was a place that I needed to, how should I say this? I needed to spread my wings and I wanted to go into film. I'd always wanted to be an actress and I couldn't do it there. But I think that leaving Kentucky and doing what I'm doing now and being able to kind of have this full circle experience that I never in a million years would have expected was kind of eye-opening to me about the synchronicities of the world. If my dad had retired in any of the other states that we had lived in, I'm not sure that this particular story would be told. Because knowing that I grew up around whiskey and bourbon, all that time, all those years, it affected me later in my life when I looked around and I was like, where are all the women? I grew up in this state. Like, how did I not know? How was I so kind of blinded by it through media and the people I was around and the lifestyle and things like that? in Kentucky. How did I not see more of that? And so I think that my roots have absolutely everything to do with the creation of this story. I never would have gone to that distillery many, many years ago when this thought form had started. The only reason that I was even there, because I didn't like whiskey and bourbon. I didn't even want to go, is that I was dating somebody at the time who loved whiskey and bourbon. And so he had come home to like visit my family and stuff. And he really wanted to go to all the whiskey distilleries, and Buffalo Trace is one of them. And that was the only reason that I was there. And so it's interesting when you kind of put different pieces of your life together and you're like, holy shit, I might be doing something entirely different had I not grown up there and had my roots in Kentucky. And Kentucky I think it's oftentimes there's a lot of misconception about it. It is a beautiful, beautiful state. The people are very Southern and kind. And it's always nice when I get to go home and people actually say hi to you on the street. Like that doesn't happen in LA. Somebody in LA says hi to you on the street. You're like, what do you want from me? But, in Kentucky, you're like, oh, hey, how's it going? And there's something really wonderful and warm about that. And I think that we still have to shift the narrative around women in Kentucky on whiskey and bourbon, because that definitely is still an issue, whether it's within the whiskey community or outside of the whiskey and bourbon community. But I agree with you that there are definitely misconceptions about Kentucky, and I'm glad that you were able to see, a different side of Kentucky than maybe you were anticipating before you went.
Yeah. I held my gas when you said you weren't a whiskey fan. I will say conversely, your then partner brought you into the whiskey fan. I will say my wife was the whiskey drinker in our relationship, and then she bought me a bottle. And I was like, I don't know. And I've become obsessed with it, obviously, because now I'm the host in this.
Oh my God, I love that. Well, that's what
there you
happened
go.
with me.
Full
It's
circle.
like, I didn't like it. I was like, this is gross. Like, I'm never going to drink. I was just a wine connoisseur. And then when I started to really learn about the art and craft of whiskey making and started, meeting with brands, talking to them, I also executive produced a television show a year and a half ago that's about whiskey and bourbon. So I flew back to Kentucky for that. We were working with a lot of different brands and distilleries, so I got to try a lot of different stuff. And I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. It's just that I was having not great whiskey and bourbon.
No, I totally get it. That's also how I feel about tequila for a long time. So in your process, is there, so coming into it, fresh eyes, you start this process, you're creating content about these spirits. Is there something, tell me something you learned that you didn't expect, whether it's about the women in this industry, just the juice itself? What is a, as Oprah say, aha moment or a light bulb moment? You're like, oh my God, this is a thing that connects to this or that or whatever. Like, was there a real epiphany moment that you've had in this process?
Yeah, there were a lot, actually. So I will give you two. The first one is I didn't realize when I was learning about women in the world of whiskey and bourbon, and I was doing all of my research and reading every book I could and watching every documentary I could, I didn't realize how oppressed women were in the whiskey and bourbon industry. I knew that they were not given the spotlight that they deserved. I knew that they had been placed in the shadows. Like, there's a woman named, I believe her name is Kathleen Carpenter, and I didn't know about her until I started doing research, and same with Margie Samuels, and both of these women have done incredible things in the whiskey and bourbon industry. But beyond that, I really started to learn how oppressed women were within the United States when it came to bourbon and whiskey. So, for example, it wasn't until 1974 that a law was passed that actually legally allowed women to serve whiskey and bourbon in a bar. 1974.
What? Okay.
That is insane. And there were women that definitely did it, you know. I think that it was a law that was very old, and I don't think that a lot of places probably adhered to it, but it was still a law. You could still arrest a woman if she was doing it. And the only way that she was actually allowed to serve whiskey or bourbon at a bar was if her father or her husband owned the bar. So when you go down this research rabbit hole, we have to really understand how bad it was so that we understand the importance of making this type of a film. And that's just one of the many laws that oppressed women and kept them down that were not overturned until very late in the game. Another one was women were not allowed to be directly marketed towards with any type of alcohol. Didn't matter if it was whiskey or bourbon, like any type of alcohol, until I believe it was the United States Spirits Council that finally lifted that ban. I want to say it was in the early 1990s. It might have been the late 1980s. I have it written down in my notes, but it still was very late in the game. And then it wasn't until 10 years later that a brand actually did it, and it was Crown Royal. They were the first brand to actually market directly towards women. So when you look at that, when you look at those types of things, you're like, what the fuck is going on? Because that's not that long ago. When you look at that, you're really like, what is happening? Because that's not that long ago. So I would say that those were a lot of the aha moments where I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? What?
Man.
And then the second one is a more positive one. The second one was how incredibly artful creating whiskey and bourbon is in America. And what a timeless piece of this beautiful American spirit is that we get to have. And every time I drink bourbon, I feel like I'm drinking a frozen moment in time because there's so much that goes into it. And because of the laws around bourbon in the United States, you know, it has very specific laws that it has to meet in order for it to be called a bourbon. And it doesn't have to be made in Kentucky, although a lot of people think that that is part of the law. It's not made anywhere in the United States. But because of the aging process, which I believe is bourbon has to be aged at least 5 years. And if it's not, it has to be, you have to say that on the bottle, I believe. But knowing that bourbon is aged in a brand new American white oak barrel every single time, and it is never reproduced in a used barrel. I, as like this creative person and loving art, think about where that tree came from and what the environment was for that tree and how old that tree was and the minerals and the vitamins and all of the elements that go into having a beautiful, healthy tree that then is used to distill this spirit that just sits in it and soaks up all of that stuff, all of that goodness, and what it was that that tree might have seen for all of those years. And then us as consumers being able to kind of drink that in. That's a really gorgeous and meaningful moment. And so however long that bourbon was aged for, you know, you're kind of going back in time with the bourbon. And that was never something I'd ever considered when I would drink bourbon or whiskey in the past. So I have this new appreciation for bourbon and whiskey. It has meaning behind it. You know, the men and women that produce it, the people who work at the distilleries that are rolling the barrels, put them in the rick houses. There's so many elements that go into making whiskey and bourbon. It's not just poured into a barrel and then it's done. It's like so many people are involved in creating that. And it's such an American spirit. And I think my dad being in the army and, he was a football player, there's like America has a wonderful, we're very patriotic. And I think that there's this pride in whiskey and bourbon in America. And so all of those elements kind of come together for me personally when I'm drinking or tasting whiskey or bourbon. And that's something I never in a million years would have expected to feel, because, it wasn't something that I liked in the past and didn't know all of this about it.
Wow. Yep. That. I feel like I'm a little speechless. Like, there's very little I can even add to that, other than to say, okay, so of all the people, I know you interviewed several people. I'm following the Spirit of Women Instagram account. Is there a dream interview? I was going to ask a favor. I'm not going to do that to you. Is there a dream interview? Is there someone you've not locked down yet that we can put good vibes out into the atmosphere to say, I would love to have this person. I know you guys are still in production. I would love to have this person in the documentary, and here's why. Who would that person be, or persons? We can make it more than one, so you don't have to pick B and Y.
The one person that I've always wanted to be part of this and in this film, because I respect her so much and what she's doing in the world, is Reese Witherspoon. She's from Tennessee. She wrote a book called Whiskey in a Teacup. She has a company called Hello Sunshine, and the entire company is about giving a voice and opportunity to women and telling women's stories and empowering women of all backgrounds. And I think that that's really, really important. So she's one of them. She has been literally on my vision board since day one. Haven't gotten her yet.
Okay.
But I believe in the power of vibes and manifestation. So I would say that she is one of them. Another one is Melissa McCarthy, because she also just became her and Ben Falcon became silent partners with Big Nose Kate, and Mel Heim from Big Nose Kate is attached to our documentary. So I think that both of those women have incredible, also they both love whiskey, but they have incredible platforms that would really help to be a voice for the women's stories that are in this film.
So lastly, we always end our interview with a couple of fun questions. Okay, so first fun question is, okay, you were not a bourbon drinker. What is your, not that you have to, you give me two. What are two bourbons if you say, all right, it's been a long day, you've been making calls, you've been getting financing, you go to grab you want to have a pour or something. What are you pouring and why?
Great question. And I'm glad you're giving me two.
Okay.
Number one, because it's hard to just choose one, to be honest. I have a collection behind me. I need to get like a whiskey and bourbon, I don't know, like touch or something, because I have so much that's just piling up and I'm in love with it. So I would say the first one is the 10-year Michter's bourbon. It's one of my absolute favorites. Michter's is actually one of the first brands I fell in love with.
Yeah.
I think that everything that they make is incredible. And I have found that I really like rye whiskeys, which I wasn't expecting to happen. But yeah, their 10-year bourbon is one of my favorites. And then I have to look and see what the name of this second one is. It calls...
This is really, really died.
Apart. There it is. So it is the Maker's Mark that is finished in French oak barrels. I was not expecting that, but because I didn't know, I haven't actually tasted a bourbon that has been finished in some kind of a wine barrel. Out of all the whiskeys and bourbons that I don't have that, except for the Maker's Mark one. And I was shocked by how incredible it is. You can taste almost the wine, like sensory on the back end of it. It's really interesting. I think it's delicious.
Wow, you said Maker's 10 year I was in, and you said bourbon. I was like, I thought you were going to say the rye. I love both of the Maker's, both of the Maker's 10 years, 10 out of 10. But yes, I'm a rye
The
guy
toasted
myself.
rye, is that the one that
Or
you?
just the 10-year rye in general the Maker's 10-year rye in general was just amazing. Toasted rye is also great. And then finally, we always like to ask people if you could have a pour with someone dead or alive, famous, you don't have to know them, who would it be and why?
You know, I gotta say, Margie Samuels. I would love to sit down with her and just be like, how did you do it? How? Like, did you ever anticipate that you were going to create this type of a legacy in the world? Not just the United States, the absolute world. Everyone knows Maker's Mark. You know, the red wax symbol is like the Nike symbol. Everybody knows it. I would love to sit down with her and have a conversation.
Okay, cool. Well, no, this is a perfect place. Margie Samuel is a great. We started there. It's a great place to end. So, lastly, I know that you guys are still in production. You are still interviewing great folks and looking to tell these great stories. Where can people follow, support the Spirit of Women documentary?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. So we have an Instagram page. We also have a website. They're both the same. The handle for both of them is The Spirit of Women Film. So if anybody wants to follow us, they can go there. And I kind of touched on this in the very beginning of our conversation. You know, we are really doing all of this ourselves. We started filming in February. We did our first round of filming. We have 2 more rounds to go. And so because I want to make this, we decided to partner with a fiscal sponsorship that allows us to receive donations and help fund this film. So if anybody is inspired by this film and wants to see it get made, we're in our second round of raising funds for it right now. It's a tax write-off for anybody who would like to donate. And they can go to our Instagram page, and in the bio, there is a link there that you can click on, and you can help support this project and all of the women who are involved and be part of this journey with us to help get it made.
Leigha, thank you so much for doing this. I think, you're telling an amazing story. We're kindred spirits because I think these are amazing stories to tell. And there's so many great stories if you just look at kind of what the future of bourbon and whiskey is in this country and in general. I mean, there's just so many people I know that you've talked to and so many more who have these amazing stories out there. So thank you for telling their stories and share your story with us.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to be able to be on here and to be able to, share this with everybody. And it's been awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Well, cheers. Thanks.